Okay. So in computability theory, the question is, can we solve or compute a problem or not? When we come to the domain of complexity theory, definitely we are not talking about can we solve or not. We assume that we can solve. The question becomes that how much time or space we gonna consume, right, in terms of computation. So the question is, okay, you can solve it, but how much time are you gonna take it to solve it? So suppose that, let's say, I think you guys are in second year, soon you're gonna sit in exams for internship. I think next year, next year, placements, 1 or 2 years hardly left, right? Suppose that there is a company, some XYZ. This company says that I'm gonna pay you 10 to the power 10 US dollars per day, right? This is the package of that company, and the job that company offers is something very simple. It says that I'm gonna give you a single problem X, and company says that it is a computable problem, right? Means certainly it is a decidable. It says that we are not going to give you some unsolvable problem. We're going to give you a computable problem. You have to design an algorithm for us and you have to give it to us. As soon as you give us the algorithm implemented solution, and we're going to test it on a few set of inputs. If it works fine, we're going to give you the payment. So you're going to start receiving the payment for the rest of your life, 10 to the power 10. If you want to increase this number, I'm okay. Whatever number you want to write, I don't mind. Maybe 20 something, which you ever dream. How many of you will like to really apply for this job? Just say yes or no in the chat. If you really want to apply, again, it's 10 to the power 10, right? And US dollars. If you want to convert it to euro or something like that, anything, whatever, I don't mind. But I think the most interesting thing is, first you should be asking what X. Certainly it's a computable problem. You can compute it. It's not like they're going to ask you to write a program that check whether there is infinite loop or not. So what? So should you apply? Should you reject all other jobs and just start working on the algorithm for this problem X, or do what? So let's try to understand what problem can they ask. Okay. I think many of you might have already heard of this problem, traveling salesman problem, right? So what is a traveling salesman problem? The problem is that there is a salesman and there are various cities he has to visit, maybe all over the world, right? He starts from one node, he travels to all other places in some order, and he wants to save his total travel cost. So the company is basically a traveling salesman company. There is a salesman who travels across marketing his product or her product, and they just want to optimize their thing for the rest of their life. So every arc, you can understand there is a cost involved for traveling from one point to another point. You want to really design. So the problem is, if they give you this overall all possible, right, routes, basically they give you the cost traveling from this place to this place, this place to this place, this place to this place, and likewise basically all the costs are available. You have to find a optimal tour so that it minimizes the cost. Very simple problem. So n cities are given, You have to just do what? You have to just find in which order these n cities should be visited such that the company does it in the least cost. Is it a very difficult problem? It's a very simple solution, solvable problem. What? Total, how many possible tours can exist? Very simple, n factorial at most, right? Somewhere actually n minus 1 factorial, but roughly close to n factorial. So n factorial different values you have to look at. If n is finite, n factorial is definitely finite. It's a finite number, not even very huge, right? It doesn't look. And then you just have to output your solution. So your algorithm is straightforward. If you want to write a trivial solution, look all possibilities, find the best and output. Wow, 10 to the power 10 USD per day. Not a bad deal. So how many of you are ready to write the algorithm? Anyone with yes answer who feels that yes, I think, is it okay? Believe me, if that you should say yes, think about that and take another 1 minute. Good. I think you guys already have the hint or you already know it. I'm not saying n is very high. I'm saying let's say n is roughly 1000. Now, if n is 1000, how much roughly time it is going to take? Or 10,000 something. Well, let's say 1000 is good. 1000 means let's say 10 to the power 3. I'm not going in the optimal way of, there might be some faster way. I'm saying if you design this rough algorithm, what is going to be? 10 to the power 3. Even if I take 100, you can do the computation. Let's try doing it with 100 because many of you might feel that 100 is something traceable. Yeah, you can do it for 100. Now there are some optimal way of doing, but assume you try to do it in vague way. What you gonna do? 10 square. This n factorial, I think you already know that this is of the order of n to the power n, right? So if you have 100, roughly your algorithm for x that you're going to design is going to take what? 100 to the power 100. Roughly if you represent in the form of 10, 10 to the power 200. What? It's not something very huge, right? Nowadays we have systems that can really compute so many instructions per second, per something like that. Suppose that company says, I will give you access to all the computers on the planet. Every single mobile device available on the planet. Every computable device that is available on the planet, it will be on your fingertip. You can hack it. We have a solution. We have a device that can hack into the system of everyone's computation device, computable device, and you can run your code using that. Suppose you have access to all. Should you then take the job? The company is very powerful. That's why it is able to pay you that much. But again, although this number looks finite, it's a computable. If you toward computability, it is okay. But again, if you try to really see how much time does it going to take, let me give you two numbers. One is something called age of universe. Right? What is age of universe? Can anyone tell what is age of universe? Good, 13 billion years. 13 billion years. If I have to really convert this into seconds, right? I don't know if my computation might go wrong, please correct. Let's say, actually it is roughly close to 13.8 into billion. How many? 10 to the power 9, right? Billion, how many zeros? Yeah, I guess 10 to the power 9 zeros, these many years. If you multiply, let's say upper bound 366, these many days, 24, these many hours, these many minutes, these many seconds. Is it? Right, so these many seconds. If I start taking upper bound on everything, let's say 13.8, I write it 20. Right, 10 to the power 9, I am representing this as 10 cube, this as 10 square, this as 10 square, this as 10 square. I think definitely this value is smaller than this. And yeah, so 9, 3, 12 to 14 to 16 to 18. 20 into 10 to the power 18. Let's say we take an even bigger number, 10 to the power 20. Even 20 we have 10 to the power 2. So 10 to the power 20 seconds. That is the age of universe. What do you mean by age of universe? Oh, is it only 6.62 into 10? Yeah, might be. So I have taken huge upper bounds everywhere, right? I just increased the number. So still, I have taken a big leap, but still it is coming 10 to the power 20 seconds. This is since the Big Bang. And in this many billion years, how many particles we have observed so far? It is called the number of particles observed in the universe, right? So number of particles actually that you have observed in the universe, if you try to say, that is 10 to the power 80 roughly. 10 to the power 80 particles that has been observed since the Big Bang. And even if I think there is some theory that says maybe 10 to the power 9 photons per particle, so roughly 10 to the power 89 photons altogether we might have. In the childhood we used to say, oh, our number of hairs are actually how many? Infinite, close to that. No, it's something very finite. So if you talk about all the electron, proton, neutron, everything, including in the universe that has been observed means from there the light has reached to us. That is only this much, 10 to the power 80. And you are asking that you have 100 to the power 100, 10 to the power 200 possible tours. Out of that you want to find the something optimal one. If you divide it by whatever the best computing facility you have, maybe some teraflops or something like that, maybe multiplied by all the computers on the planet. If you multiply with all that, if you divide with all that value, is still what you're gonna get is not something less than the age of universe or the number of particles or something beyond that. So you're gonna take maybe whatever you have spent the time in this universe. I'm not saying you, it means that the universe itself, how much time it has spent, you're going to take at least that much more time. Do you think company is really going to pay you that much? You're going to say the company, oh wait, I have just clicked enter, the code is running and it is going to take this much time, and it will get back to you after maybe some 100 billion years or something like that, and 10 to the power these many seconds. So that's a joke. So yeah, what is the overall, all this kind of drama, what it was about? It was about that, see, although we might be able to solve problems, we have to understand how much time it is going to take, right? I think if we start learning the coding, in the first thing, if a code starts running and it is not showing anything for another few seconds, we say, oh, infinite loop or something like that. We can't wait for, certainly there are people who run their coding for my days, hours, months, years. They do it. They have done, there are people who have ran, but still we have a time limit, right? We are not going to run a code which is going to run beyond our lifetime. What is the use of it? So certainly we have some time. We want to see that how much time a problem is going to take to be solved. And it is of interest. So that's why we need to understand what is complexity. So whenever you write an algorithm, you have to see that how much time it is going to take. If it is really something good, okay, we're gonna accept that algorithm. Otherwise, even if you can solve, I'm not gonna really accept the algorithm. What is the use of that algorithm? Yeah, theoretically it might be something of interest, but in practical it has no application, right? So let us take a simple problem from Turing machine perspective. You're gonna talk about analysis of algorithms and all in your algorithms course very soon. I think it might be already running or it will be running soon. But from Turing machine perspective, Turing machine, because it is a theoretical model for every algorithm, it is equivalent to algorithm. So we're gonna study from this perspective, right? So before we're gonna do that, I think there are something we need to revise and understand few of the terminologies. So for example, whenever we are trying to compare the complexity, we need to understand what is the input size. Because whenever you want to compare any algorithm and say it takes this much time. So are you gonna say in seconds? No. People say, I have heard in Viva or interview when asking students, oh, how much time your algorithm takes? And they said, sir, only 2 seconds or only 1 second it takes. That's one of the worst answers you can give ever. Whenever anyone asks how much time does your algorithm take, they're actually trying to understand how much complex your algorithm is and how much running time in terms of its asymptotic notation. Right? So you should be able to judge that if the algorithm input size is huge, it is going to take huge time. When it is small, it is going to take a small time. But there is a measure which says the proportional relationship between the input size and the running time. And you have to tell that. And I think you're gonna already understand these asymptotic relationships in your algorithms course in detail. There is big O, small o, big omega, small omega. So I hope you guys already know it, right? Just let me know. Oh, good, great. So I don't need to go in deep of that. There are two important different analysis of any algorithm. Something is called worst case, the other is called average case. What is worst case? Worst case is that out of all possible instances that can exist, right, for a given input size, how much does it take? And you take the worst of the worst, right? Whatever is the longest time it is taking, that will be the bound. Average, you're gonna take the average of the running time for that, and you're gonna say that. So worst is like the max time out of all possible times for a given input size. Average is about like taking the average over all possible instances. Now, what do you mean by asymptotic notation, right? So I think this word you might be using a lot in whenever you are trying to theoretically analyze, right? What do you mean by that? So see, as I said, really going deep into the analysis part and the expression might be a bit complex. So you might have so many factors, it's a 2n square plus something blah blah and all that. But I think if we make our life very complex, we might not be able to achieve what we want to do. We want to learn altogether. So we say, okay, we don't care about all these small orders in that expression. But tell me how much maximum it can take. I think that's all is. I want to understand that certainly it is going to halt around that time, roughly. Or maybe I understand how it grows altogether as per the input. So to understand that, there are different notations, and I think you already know. So we are directly going to jump and start analyzing the first Turing machine that we want to analyze. So let's say that there is a problem A. So A is a language. Problem means a language for theory of computation course, right? So this problem is something very simple. Is it a regular language? The answer is no. Is it a context-free language? The answer is yes. So is it a decidable language? The answer is yes. Certainly you can easily build a Turing machine for it, right? So let's see the first Turing machine that we have here. So what this machine does on input W, the first step is that it scan across the tape and reject if you have a 0 is found to the right of a 1. What does it mean? It says that altogether whatever is the input W, it should belong to 0 star 1 star. You cannot have a 0 even in the right of 1, because then it is not in the proper format of the input itself. You can immediately reject that. So the Turing machine is going to scan across the tape and it is going to reject if there is a 0 found to the right of 1, right? That is the simplest thing you can do to discard the input. Next, if you found that okay, it is in the proper format, you have a block of zeros followed by block of ones, then what you gonna do? So then you're gonna repeat something, right? So this is not the high level I'm talking about. High level was a different thing. This is a higher level description where we're gonna talk about tapes, movements and all that. So repeat if both zeros and ones remain on the tape. And while repeating, what you're gonna do, you're gonna scan across the tape crossing off a single 0 and a single 1, right? So you're going to really go across the tape from left to right, and in one round you are crossing a 0 against a 1, and then until there are zeros and ones are remaining on the tape, you're going to keep repeating this process, right? Now the final step for taking the decision, if zeros still remain, right? So basically if zeros still remain and ones are crossed off, or vice versa. What do you mean by vice versa? That if ones are zeros are crossed off and ones are remaining, so in that case what we're gonna do? We're gonna reject, right? Otherwise, certainly if neither 0, because if zeros and ones both are remaining, still you're gonna keep doing the crossing. You have already considered the case if zeros are there, ones are crossed off, or ones are there, zeros are crossed off, reject. So the only case that is remaining is that zeros and ones all are crossed off. So in that case, you're gonna accept. Okay, good. So is the algorithm clear? Anyone has any question on the working of algorithm, that it will not work or it will work, whatever? Anyone has any doubt? Okay, if none, then let's say that the size of input is n. That means the length of this string is n. So because the input size is n, so whenever I say input size, you can assume that input size, whenever, remember this thing. Input size, whenever ever you are comparing the time and trying to compute time complexity, always when you get this question, what is the input size, try visualizing that you are writing that thing on the Turing machine, how much cells it is going to occupy on that input tape. That will be your answer, right? Always think in that way. So if you're really going to place it, whatever is the length of this, that is your input size here. It's a very trivial thing. And there's a question 0 to 0k, 1k, all ones are after all zeros. Yeah, all ones are, that's what means, right? You have a block of zeros followed by a block of ones, and you are claiming that the number of zeros and number of ones are same. Now, if the input size is n, let's try to see how much time does it take to really. Let's take step 1. How much time is step 1 is going to take? Scan across the tape and reject if zeros is found to the right. So if this is your tape, right, and suppose that your input is lying here, you have all the zeros here, and then you have all the ones here, here you have blank, here you have blank. You are starting your tape here. When you take this tape up to the right, and right, you need to really take it up to this point for the step 1. To do that, how many you gonna move the tape? N times, right? So roughly, because n symbols are there, so you have to cross one by one all the symbols, and you have to make sure, okay, zeros, zeros, zeros. As soon as you start getting ones, if you get any zero after that, you go to Q reject. That's a simple Turing machine to do this step 1. Now, you went there here. It took how much time? Somewhere of the n steps. But once you are done, you have to, before starting the repeat process, you have to bring your header back to this location. So maybe 2n steps. But because we are talking asymptotically, right, what we're gonna do? We're gonna just write order of n. So order of n means we already ignore the constant whatever the coefficients or small order terms. So order n time it takes for step 1. What about step 2? So step 2 is a loop, if you can really understand. It says repeat if both zeros and ones are remaining. So now in a loop, whenever you get and you are trying to do the analysis, you have to see that how many times the loop is going to run, and in each iteration, how much time it is going to spend. So let's first see that how much time it is going to spend in each run. So let's try to see step 3. So it is scanning across the tape, crossing of a single 0 and a single 1. So it crosses a 0 which is not yet crossed, it goes across and crosses another 1. How much maximum it is going to really cross? Actually, if you see, starting with this, it might have to cross almost n, right, order of n. Why? There might be more zeros than ones, so it is going to cross more zeros. But in whatever case, it is not going to take more than order n time. So all the scanning and crossing, this is going to take order n time. Now, in every step you are crossing a 0 with a 1, and because the maximum time this loop can run is actually n by 2. So How many iterations will be there? Again n by 2, because we are already dealing with order asymptotic notation, so again order n. And then if zeros are still remaining and ones are crossed, to check it, right? Once you are done with your loop, just to check whether to accept or reject the input, you're gonna again for order n. So what is the final running time? It is actually, if you try to order n for first, step 2 and 3 combined, because it's a loop, so order of n into order of n, right? And then you have order n. So this is altogether order of n square. Is there any doubt in this, that it is order n square? So the running time is order n square for this particular Turing machine. Anyone has any doubt in this? Okay. Now let's try to understand. There is something like the bubbles we had, if you remember, for languages, that it's a regular, it's this. So in time complexity, again we have something called time classes or time hierarchy. So let us define. Let t be a function from n to r plus, then a time complexity class time of tn. It's basically collection of all languages that are decidable by order Tn time Turing machine. Now when I say order Tn time Turing machine, what do I mean by that? That there is it is decidable by order Tn time Turing machine. Order Tn time Turing machine says that there exists a machine M that guarantees to halt in order Tn time for all possible inputs. Whatever is your input, it guarantees to halt in order Tn time and decides. So that is your decider for this. So if you have a Turing machine that can solve a language, that language will fall in this time hierarchy class. Time. So in that sense, because we have analyzed that this particular Turing machine takes order of n square time, and the problem A can be solved in order n square time using this Turing machine M1. So we can write that the problem A that we have just looked at belongs to time of n square. Correct? Okay. I think that's trivial as per the definition of this time n square. Time n square is what? Collection of all the languages that are decidable by a Turing machine in order n square time. And certainly your problem is decidable in order n square time. Whatever will be the input, as per the input size, it will decide in order n square time. Therefore, this formal language, it has a decider that can solve in order n square time. So this language belongs to time n square class. Okay. Next question is, can we really reduce it? That means, can we do it in small o n square time? What do you mean by small o n square time? Something lower than n square. Anyone with any idea? How can you do that? If you try crossing two symbols at a time, what will happen? You will reduce the time by half. But still, it's a asymptotic notation, so it will end up giving you the same. That's an interesting answer. Use a PDA. Wow. Yeah, PDA you can again think of it in terms of algorithm. This Turing machine, right? So whatever you do with the PDA, that you can also do with the Turing machine. Turing machine, we are saying that it is equivalent to algorithm. So that's why we are dealing only with Turing machines. So if you want whatever you can do with PDA, if you try to do it using Turing machine, how much time is it going to take? Can you design a Turing machine that can do it better than n square? Anyone? Oh, you have plenty of memory. There is no short memory, right? I'm not saying there is any constraint on memory. Okay, think. You have to design a machine that is faster than M1 for the same problem. Oh, good. A multi-tape Turing machine. Yeah, we'll come to that soon. Very soon we're gonna talk about that. But before that, suppose that we don't utilize multi-tape. Can you do it faster than this? Think. By that time, I'm just writing the description of that machine. Anyone with the answer? So we have two steps in the repeat, step 3 and step 4. I think rest are very similar to what we had on machine 1, right? Just in the repeat, we are changing something that is going to do some magic. This already takes order and time. This even takes order and time. Now we have to decide how much time how many iterations will be there and how many each iteration. Okay. What you're gonna do, definitely, first you're gonna make sure that it is actually something of the type of 0 star, 1 star. That is made sure by looking at the first step. Then you're gonna repeat it as long as zeros and ones both are on the tape. Then what you're gonna do? You're gonna scan across the tape, checking whether the total number of zeros and ones, right? So you're gonna scan and check if the number of remaining zeros plus number of ones which are not crossed, right, it is even or odd. You're gonna check that, and if it is odd, you're gonna reject, because at any point of time number of zeros and ones are actually the total number is odd. What does it mean? Certainly number of zeros are more than number of ones, or number of ones are more than number of zeros. Very good. I think Dhruv, you got the idea. So if you have done this, then what you can do? When you have found that both are even or both are odd, then only you're gonna go to step 4. Otherwise, you're gonna reject here only. Once you realize that you are not rejecting it here, that means number of zeros and number of ones, both are either even or both are odd. So at least they are of the similar nature. So there is a chance of that they are same. So then you're gonna again scan, and what? As Dhruv said, you're gonna cancel every alternative 0 and every alternative 1. So you're gonna cross, right? You're gonna cross every other 0 starting from first 0 and every other one starting from first one. What I'm saying, if you're gonna really do that, so if I have to visualize, it's like you have 0 0 0 0 0, you have 1 1 1 1 1. In the first round, I'm not really going in a formal way of explaining, but it's like first you're gonna cross this 0, then this 0, then this 0, then you're gonna cross this 1, this 1, this 1. And before doing that, you're gonna count, right? So 5 zeros and 5 ones, both are odd, so that's fine. I'm gonna do the crossing. Once crossing is done, you're gonna check whether there is any remaining 0 or 1 there. Answer is yes, there are still 2 zeros and 2 ones there. What you're gonna do? When there are remaining zeros and ones, you're gonna again check how many zeros, 2 zeros, how many ones, 2 ones, even. So again you're gonna cross every alternative. You crossed this, you cross this. Then you're gonna check in the next round number of zeros and ones. It is still remaining and they are odd. So what are you gonna do? Again you're gonna cross them. Right? Once you cross them, everything is over. Your loop breaks and you actually go out and say that if there are any zeros or ones remaining, no, accept. Good. Now, what is the surety that this algorithm is going to work? First question is that. That is called something correction. Proof of correctness. Proof of correctness is that this algorithm really does the same job that you wanted it to do, for which you have designed it. So proof of correctness is something very important if you are really studying algorithms. And the next thing is to really analyze that. So whenever you design any algorithm, first thing is to check whether your algorithm really runs and does the same job that you want it to do. If you don't check it, sometimes it might be running perfectly fine, but it might give you something else, some other answer. Right. So to do that, the correctness of this algorithm is very trivial. See, it is something called even odd parity. What this step, if you want to see this step, what this step is making sure? This step is making sure that whenever you have number of zeros and ones, this step is making sure that always there will be zeros and ones together remaining. If any of them are not remaining, the loop breaks because there is a AND relationship. And you're going to reach to 5 and you're going to say that, oh, there are either zeros or ones, and you're going to reject. So certainly both zeros and ones are remaining, then only you're going to enter in the loop. Once you really enter, scanning and checking that the total is even, what does it mean? Either both of them are even or both of them are odd. If both of them are even or both of them are odd, what it makes sure? And when you cut it in half, what it does? If you try to realize, it is doing nothing but it is actually converting this into binary, and actually it's checking one by one the bits. For example, initially there were 5 and 5. When you checked that if both are even or odd, you got that both are odd and odd, right? When both were odd and odd, so it went through. So after that, you're gonna get, once you cut it in half, you're gonna get 2 and 2. And because it were odd, so there will be, if you represent every odd by 1, every odd by 1 here, then you got a 1 here. Next time it's even. So let's say even is represented by 0, so you get a 0 0 here. Next time you cut it in half, you get 1 1, which is odd, so you're gonna get a 1 for this. And finally it gets cuts in 0 and it gets cuts in 0, and you don't have to check for this case because the loop breaks. So if you see this 101, if you read from left to right, what you're gonna get? I think it's exactly converting the decimal into binary. So what you are doing actually in the process, actually you are checking if the binary bits are same for both of them, and that you are doing by checking the even odd parity. Every number you are dividing, so there are two numbers n1 and 2 are given. What you are, how to check whether both numbers are same? Divided by half, see if any remainder is there. If one has a remainder, the other doesn't have, that means their binary bits cannot be same and rejected. It's a very simple and very efficient algorithm. Simple, good. Efficient, let's see. So, scanning and checking whether number of zeros and ones all together are even or odd. How much time is it going to take? Someone asked that, what is the cost of checking even odd? You tell me. You did it with for the DFA also, right? It is just checking all together that when you are crossing total scan, how many symbols which were not crossed off, whether they were even or odd. How much time is it going to take? Good. Simple even odd will work. You are not checking for the zeros individually and ones individually. You are just checking all together whether the total number is even or odd, right? Remaining. The crossed ones you are not considering. So basically, whenever you see a crossed off symbol, you are not moving your state, right? You are not changing your state. As soon as you encounter a symbol which is not crossed, you're gonna keep changing your states. So finally, how much time is it going for to take for step 3? One complete scan, right? So altogether, can I write order n? Anyone has any question to that? The whole scan, and while scanning, you can keep changing the states. So altogether, once you are done scanning, in order n time, you will be able to declare whether the number of remaining symbols are odd or even. Now, once that is done, scan and cross every other zero starting from ones. How much time does it take? Another order n time? Correct? Because you're going to go from left to right, starting from the first remaining zero, wherever it is, you're going to cross every alternate zero. And again, you can do it using order n, right? Again, two states. As even odd you had there, cross or don't cross, something like that. So order n time done. How many steps you will have, how many iterations for 2? That is your answer. Can you tell? How many iterations your code will run? When you keep cutting things in half, you have seen this strategy, right? You have seen it in binary search, sorting, heap sort, merge sorting, or something. Whenever you try to really cut things in half, somehow you end up getting what? Something. So whatever if you try to write the exact one, it will be somewhere at most 1 plus log n base 2. But we ignore every constant and everything, so overall order log n will be there. And that's very trivial, right? When you are trying to check the number using their binary bit, if number is n, how many binary bits it will require to represent itself? Those many times the loop will run, right? Because the loop is checking in every bit of the binary. So if there is a n number, how many bits it will require to be represented in binary? Log n base 2, right? Something of the order of that. So it takes order of log n many iterations, and every iteration takes n plus n time. So order n plus order n altogether, this will give you a single order n. It is not a square because it doesn't get multiplied, it is within the loop. So altogether the running time will be order of n plus order of n times order of log n plus order of n. The result is order of n log n. So what you can say? You can say that your this language A is actually now in time n log n. So you got it in a smaller class of time hierarchy, right? Okay, let's get back to what Dhruv suggested, I think, some time back. Let's try using multi-tape. Multi-tape, how can you do it? Let's try writing machine 3. I'm not going to write the whole algorithm, but it looks very simple. What are you going to do? If it is given on one tape, this is a block of zeros, this is block of ones. What you can do on the multi-tape, take 3 tape or take just 2 tape machine, right? Keep moving the header, moving from left to right, and until you are receiving zeros, keep copying it on the second tape. So first tape is for the input, second tape you are just keeping, and as you move your header from left to right and you are encountering zeros, keep copying it on the second tape. Once you are done with zeros and you start encountering 1, bring your header back to the first 0 and then move one by one step from left to right. So what you're gonna do, you're gonna cancel first 0 with first one. Then you're gonna cancel second 0 with second one. And likewise. So if n is the total length, at most order n time it will take to copy the number of zeros on the second tape, and another order n step it will take to compare both zeros and ones. So it is going to take order n many multi-tape Turing machine steps to check the same. Is it clear or not? Anyone has any doubt? I'm not writing the description of the machine, but let me know if it is not clear. I'll repeat. So basically, you are copying the component of zeros on the second tape. How much maximum time it will take? N header movements, right? Order n. And then once you are done with that and move the head backwards, again order n steps to bring the header backward on the second tape. Then again start matching first zero with first one, second zero with second one, third zero with third one, maximum order n. Overall order n, linear time. Correct? So for A, what we realized, there were three machines we have seen, M1, M2, M3. M1 says order of n square, M2 says order of n log n, and M3 says order of n. So there is a problem. When we were in computability theory, we just used to say that, can you compute it or not? And we used to say whether two machines are, and the power of machines were in the sense of solving. Can you solve the same set of languages or can you solve more than that? Can you decide for the same set of languages or can you decide more than that? And if you remember, we said that whether you have a single tape deterministic Turing machine or you have a multi-tape deterministic Turing machine or you have any type of non-deterministic Turing machine, in terms of power to decide or to compute, they all are equivalent. Their power is same. They were equivalent to each other for computation. But when you come to the time complexity, and because as you have already seen, whatever solve in order n squared time on a single tape Turing machine, the multi-tape does it in very fast time. Can I do in a similar time on the single tape Turing machine? The answer is no, you cannot do it. It will take at least this much time. There is actually proof that says you cannot do better than n log n. There cannot exist any algorithm that takes a small o of n log n for this simple problem. So we have to fix, because when you are defining, right, if you remember when we were defining this class time, we said all languages that are decidable by a time Turing machine. But then there will be a problem with this time, because my M1 says that A belongs to time n square, while my N3 says that A might belong to time n. But in reality, we know that if we fix a model for this definition of time, so then the story will be different. So therefore, it is very important to fix a model whenever we are defining this time class. And to do that, we stick to a single definition that we're going to say that this Turing machine that you are mentioning here, it is a single tape deterministic Turing machine. Always remember, when we are talking about the time, it is a single tape deterministic Turing machine. Okay. Now the question comes, you are saying that if you actually change the model, the time changes. How much difference does it become if you actually convert from one model to another? If we understand that, at least we will be able to understand if we have a multi-tape Turing machine, something simple, if we try to convert it into a single tape Turing machine, we should be able to understand how much time gap will be there. Right? So, although we have already understood that this is equivalent to this is equivalent to this, in result, this is also equivalent to this. But in all this process, how much time gap will it be there? That's what we need to understand now. So that whenever we are comparing the problems, that how much time it takes to decide a problem, it is very important that you compare them on the same scale. Right? Someone saying 100 seconds and 2 minutes. You are not going to see the only the numeric value that 100 seconds it is a larger value than 2 minutes, because the unit is different. So just like there, you have to have the same kind of model for the design of Turing machine, and once you do that, then you can compare their time complexity. Okay, in that case, let's try to see that when we convert this multi-tape deterministic Turing machine to single tape deterministic Turing machine, how does the time varies? And actually it doesn't vary much in terms of polynomial sense, but still let's see how much. So there is a theorem that says that if Tn, right, if Tn is a function of n such that Tn is greater or equals to n, so Tn is such a function, so every Tn time multi-tape Turing machine, right, multi-tape Turing machine has an equivalent order of t square n time single tape Turing machine. What does it mean? That when you do the conversion from multi-tape to single tape, actually the maximum your time can grow is square of the time that you were taking on multi-tape Turing machine. So we're gonna prove that. To prove that, I think you have to really remember the idea how we used to convert the multi-tape to single tape. Anyone has any idea? Please speak up. Please unmute your mic and just try to revise us what. So we used to say that, okay, you have a multi-tape Turing machine. It has some K tapes. We're going to convert this into a single tape Turing machine with just one tape. How we were doing it? Anyone?
Using separators, separate the tapes on the single tape machine.
Good. So what we used to do, if you remember, we try to really copy the content of every tape separated by a hash, right? And there were k plus 1 hash that really kept everything. You copied. Can you just mute yourself, please? Okay, so correct. So you're gonna append the string after the string. So basically copy the content on the single tape, and then every transition step here on a multi-tape and transition on single tape, it was actually about going from left to right, and you had the headers written here as a dotted form, right? For every tape you had the heads represented in the dot symbol form. So you used to access them. So going from left to right, you were able to read, okay, the head is at A on the first, B on the second, C on the third tape, and likewise. So you're going to read all K heads moving from left to right, and coming back. Then for incorporating the changes, in the worst case, for every change, you might have to add a cell here. For this, you have to shift everything in the right. So I hope the algorithm you remember, so we just have to do the analysis. So in the analysis part, if we have to understand, remember that every transition step for the multi-tape Turing machine was equivalent to the following. First is scanning from left to right and finding the head symbols. Means where the header was on their individual tape, you have the recording on the single tape using the dot symbols of that. You find it. Once you are done, you have to come back to the start state, and then one by one you have to incorporate the change. To incorporate a change on every tape on this, it might take at most a whole scan from left to right for the whole single tape Turing machine. Why? Because suppose that you are trying to move the header from the first hash to the right. Basically, you want to replace this hash with a blank and convert into a symbol. It's like on this tape, the first tape you had blank and you converted into some X. So here you can, because hash was placed right after this symbol. To do that, what you're gonna do, you're gonna really shift this whole content into right one by one each cell, and then you're gonna come back and you're gonna place whatever X is there, it will come here. So that will require how much maximum time? Again, going front and coming back. Because to shift it, what you have to do, you have to go in the last, convert the blank into the previous, and likewise you're gonna do, and once you arrive at this place, you're gonna just fill in X. So there are K tapes, so there can be, in worst case, K such insertions in every transition for the multi-tape. So whatever is the length, you're gonna traverse it once for reading the headers, and you're gonna traverse it for another K times for really putting the transition effect there. So K plus 1 rounds of reading, certainly order of that, not just K plus 1. Right? Go and come back, something like that. So how much time it is going to take on this single tape Turing machine? We know that how much time it takes order Tn time here, because it is a Tn time multi-tape Turing machine. So it takes Tn time. So can you tell what is the maximum possible length of the single tape Turing machine ever? Can you tell? What is the maximum possible length ever during the run? Maybe in terms of Tn. Can you tell? Because you are saying K plus 1 times of reading you're gonna do of this whole tape. So if you have the upper bound on the length, you can tell that, okay, K plus 1 times that upper bound, that is the maximum times you're gonna do the reading, right? Anyone? What can be the length? Can I say that it will be order of? Tell me. The answer is yes. We can always say why. The question is, why can we say like that? See, suppose that your multi-tape Turing machine, it is taking how much time? It is taking order Tn time. Correct? So in every step, if this machine moves right, how many maximum cells it is going to cover on each step? If in every step, suppose it is taking tn steps, if in every step you are moving in the right on every tape, suppose, how many maximum cells can you cover on each tape on the multi-tape Turing machine? It will not be more than tn, right? Can you cover more than tn in tn time? The answer is no, because at least you're gonna take 1 unit of time to move the header, right? Time we are talking in terms of how many movements. So every movement you can move the header to right, that is the best, without coming back or doing any modification or something like that. So in the worst case, the maximum that content is written on each tape will be of size tn, and there are k tapes, so it will be k times tn, right? But because a multi-tape Turing machine, what is k? K is a constant. So finally, even in the worst case, if you copy the largest contents of the tapes, k tapes, your single tape Turing machine, the length will be still bounded by order of tn. So the length of the tape, when you convert from multi-tape to single tape, it is bounded by order of tn. Okay. Now, so order of tn is the length, and this tn, how many times you are traversing to incorporate or settle the effect of one single transition step. Because on this length, you're gonna run order of k plus 1 times or something like that. And this is again a constant, k. So finally, to settle one iteration on the multi-tape Turing machine, you are taking how much time? So one step of transition on this multi-tape Turing machine, when you try to really simulate the same on the single tape Turing machine, it takes tn time, order of tn. Anyone has any doubt in this? That is the first small analysis we have already done. If you also do analysis of how many steps are there, number of steps, then we are done with the total computation. So how many maximum steps you will have on the multi-tape Turing machine? Number of steps means how many transitions you can have at most. Because again, you said that the machine runs in order tn time, so it takes tn at most transitions, right? So the number of steps will be again tn. Can it be more than that? See, because your machine decides the multi-tape Turing machine in order tn time, actually in tn steps. So you have at most order of tn many transitions can be there. So if you want to compute on the single tape Turing machine how much time it will take to decide the same problem, it will be number of steps multiplied by time to simulate each step. How many steps maximum can be there? As per the multi-tape, maximum you have to incorporate order of tn many multi-tape transitions. And each multi-tape transition will take at most order of tn many time steps to really simulate it on the single tape Turing machine. So overall, it is going to take order of t square n time. Therefore, the entire simulation is going to take this much. Certainly, there might be some lower order terms, order n or something like that, because you first want to read the input from left to right or something like that, but we are ignoring all that. Because you have already assumed that Tn is actually greater or equal to n. Okay. Is there any doubt in this? If not, then the next theorem is that let Tn be a function such that Tn is greater or equals to n, then every Tn time non-deterministic Turing machine, right? So non-deterministic, let's say single tape. So if I have to write, it is non-deterministic single tape Turing machine. Wow, in short form. So then every Tn time non-deterministic single tape Turing machine has an equivalent 2 to the power order of Tn time deterministic single tape Turing machine. So you should go back, try to understand how we were converting the non-deterministic machine to single tape deterministic Turing machine, and then try to also think about how much time it will take to simulate every step of the non-deterministic Turing machine. And once you realize this is the, so if you try to understand, when we had this multi-tape, right, deterministic multi-tape Turing machine, and we tried to convert it into single tape, so deterministic single tape Turing machine, whether it is deterministic, non-deterministic, it doesn't matter, by the way. Whenever you have a multi-tape Turing machine, you try to convert into single tape Turing machine, Tn time here, you start taking order of t square n time. When you have a non-deterministic single tape Turing machine and you convert it into deterministic single tape Turing machine, it starts taking the Tn time here becomes 2 to the power order of Tn. Altogether, what does it mean? Suppose that it is true. Suppose that this theorem is true, right? Then this result says that when you are converting from multi-tape model to single tape model, there is a polynomial increase. Just it becomes a square of that. So polynomial increase in that time. While if you convert a non-deterministic Turing machine into a deterministic Turing machine, the hike in time is exponential. A problem which looks very simple on a non-deterministic machine, if you try to solve it on a single tape Turing machine, it will take exponential in the time what you were taking on the non-deterministic machine. And exponential time is not very good, right? You have already seen 100 is something good. 2 to the power 100 is, oh my god, it's huge. 100 is nothing. 2 to the power 100 is huge. It is close to whatever is the number of it is even higher than number of particles in the universe. So it's that kind of gap you have there. So you have to revise your non-deterministic conversion to deterministic Turing machine, and then you should try realizing. If not, we will start from this point in the next class, and then we'll try to cover the time classes, and we'll take the collection and union of that in terms of P class, NP class, and we'll go ahead. That's all for today. Thank you so much.